Is there some treatment or therapy for autism?
A lot of parents come and say, fix my child. There is no fix.
How do you know if your child is autistic?
It is for a developmental pediatrician to diagnose the condition.
How many such specialists are there in our country?
Very few. Appointments are given after 6 months, 8 months. You have to wait.
Oh, goodness.
So, like if you take the case of my son, Veer, when he spoke, he reversed pronouns. He would not give eye contact. And I said, Veer, look in my eyes. And he said, no, I can't. It hurts me.
Oh.
So it's physically painful for him to look.
Parents would need a lot of therapy themselves. This is not easy.
The moms need the therapy, yes, but the dads.
The sibling always takes a backseat when there is a special needs child in the family.
That is very often the case. But I think the amount that this child has taught me, I would be a very, very, very different person if he was not in my life.
Today's conversation is going to touch many, many viewers because today we are going to talk about autism. My guest is Gopika Kapoor, best-selling author of the book Beyond the Blue and founder of the app Buddy Up. Gopika is also a therapist for autistic adults and parents of autistic children. Most importantly, Gopika is a parent of an autistic child. In this chat, we're going to talk about what is autism, how can parents deal with an autistic child, society's role, and what an autistic person needs the most. So I'm going to start with the first question that you are the mother of an autistic child. He's no longer a child, he's an adult, I know. What does autism mean?
So autism is what you call a neurodevelopmental condition. Now, if you look at the etymology of the word and you break up neurodevelopmental, neuro means relating to the brain, developmental means just progress. So it is a condition that impacts the development of the brain. The primary areas in which the brain is impacted by this is of social communication, sensory, a lot of processes in terms of being able to put themselves in other people's shoes. There is a whole social aspect which gets impacted. In some cases, it could be cognitive as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing to know about autism is that it's a spectrum. What that means is you can have anybody with autism is different from another person with autism because they could lie anywhere on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have somebody who could be not speaking and would need tremendous supports with daily living skills, with the being able to communicate, being able
not
to
speaking.
express
Why?
them.
Because speech is impacted, or the
Speech
brain
is
doesn't
impacted.
allow.
Yes, the brain does not allow the speech functionality.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so this person could be non-speaking. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you could have somebody who's a double PhD scholar who is a professor.
Oh.
And the thing is, both would have the same kind of struggles. Also studied along the spectrum would be other people. So like if you take the case of my son, Veer.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He's 21. So he is, for example, his strengths, I would say, is his extreme focus when it comes to things like puzzles, when it comes to Lego. He can take these small pieces of Lego and make this huge thing.
Better than other kids?
Yes,
better
much
than
better.
other
Because
kids.
his focus is so strong.
Okay.
So he will sit with one puzzle, which is like a 1,500 piece puzzle, which maybe a neurotypical person might take 2 weeks, a month to kind of work on.
Yes.
And he will sit with it and focus completely on that and finish it in 2 days.
Okay. Wow.
Because that focus is there for that particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very good baker. and not such a good cook because baking has very specific instructions.
Measurements.
So if something and measurements. So if something is 327 grams, he will measure 327 grams,
Got
not
it.
1 gram less,
Yeah.
not 1 gram more.
Yeah.
So those
So it's
kind
very
of things.
tailor-made for his
Exactly.
inclination.
Exactly.
Yes.
But on the other hand, he will struggle with social situations which are either unfamiliar to him. So he's now comfortable enough to say, hi, I'm Veer, and how are you? And he's learned those scripts. But even within his friends group, he might struggle with things which may be a little out of the ordinary. There is a plan which is made for dinner to go to X place, and now suddenly somebody says, I can't go to X, let's go to Y. And there is a lot of conversation happening on the WhatsApp group, going back and forth. That might be something which
So this
causes
kind
anxiety.
of wiring of uncertainty doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. It is something which has to be learnt,
Right.
but it is difficult to kind of go with the flow as a neurotypical person would expect. So I remember when I was talking to the parents of an autistic young man who is about 26, 27, and he was diagnosed late. He went to college, did an MBA, everything, and was diagnosed at, I think, 22, 23.
Oh, he did an MBA as well?
Yes. His mom was telling me, she said, I don't know what to do. I tell him that we are making poha for breakfast, and then I don't find poha and I make idli instead, and he has this big fit and I don't know what to do. Why is he getting so angry? And I had to explain to her, it is not that you've made, whatever, idli instead of poha. The fact is that he was expecting a particular thing, and because his brain for so many years has been accustomed to following a particular routine, that change in the routine is what has caused the anxiety and the resulting meltdown, not the poha or the idli. People with autism, because they do not have what is called theory of mind. Theory of mind means, very simply put, the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Okay.
Now, this is something which is not a natural behavior for them. It is a learnt behavior. You can teach it. So, it's not exactly empathy.
Okay.
And so that also leads to one myth, which is that people who are autistic do not have feelings, which is not true.
Okay.
They do have feelings, and they feel very, very deeply. Sometimes they don't know how to express those feelings.
Right.
They don't have the tools or the ability to express those feelings, which is why people feel that people with autism don't have feelings.
Because feelings, again, is a very non-standard
it's such a vague
expression.
Abstract. So anything which is abstract is difficult.
How do you know if your child is autistic?
So firstly, there is such little awareness in this country.
Okay.
And so people don't know. Then there is this kind of myth that boys will develop later than girls. So in any case, you're saying, my child is not speaking, my child is not walking, and if it's a boy. And your pediatrician also will say...
And is this more male condition, or it's...
So there used to be the statistic when Veer was diagnosed that it is 1:4, like out of every 4 diagnoses. In the sense, it's 4 males to 1 female kind of thing.
Oh.
Recently, new statistics say it's 50-50.
Okay.
So it's just that girls are better at masking the symptoms and hiding the symptoms.
Oh.
But coming back to what the symptoms are or what the characteristics are, I remember when Veer was about 5 months old, he would not respond to his name. He would not look when you said, Veer, Veer, he would not look, which most kids do. He was slow to give a social smile. When the babies give that kind of social smile.
Yes.
Then when he was about a year old, I remember on his first birthday party, and because he has a twin sister, it was very easy to see points of comparison.
Correct.
On his first birthday party, I have a very distinct memory of her walking around, and she loved being the center of attention. She knew something was up. She may not have known it was her birthday, but she loved it. Everybody wanted to play with her. Everybody wanted to be with her. He was in I had arranged for tents and I had kept it deliberately kind of low key because I think somewhere I sensed that he would not like a big fat birthday party. And he was sitting inside a tent and he did not want to come out. He was very happy to sit inside this tent. And I remember my husband having to pull him out when we were cutting the cake, and he cried and whatever. We had no clue what was going on, at that point of time. I remember he spoke later than my daughter. When he spoke, he reversed pronouns. You know what that means is he would call I, you, and you, I.
Okay.
His words were less. His vocabulary was less. When he was in play school, I remember the teachers telling us that, he's not able to follow instructions. He's during circle time, he's just wandering around. He doesn't have friends. So all these, not responding to name call, eye contact was a big one. He would not give eye contact. Even now, when he meets new people, he finds it very hard. And I remember we were, a couple of years ago, we were dancing together and we were slow dancing, the two of us. And I said, Veer, look in my eyes. And he said, no, I can't. It hurts me. So it's actually physically painful for him to look me in the eyes. So,
but when did you end up taking him for a diagnosis?
So there's a little bit of a filmy story to that. Tare Zameen Par had come out. And there were, I remember we used to get the Hindustan Times then, and the papers were full of articles about dyslexia.
Right.
And, I had been thinking for a long time that there's something different about this kid. But I think for a parent to kind of verbalize their own fears makes it a reality.
Yes.
So I was not even discussing it with my husband.
You don't want to jinx
because
it.
I don't want to say what is in my mind, because then it becomes a reality. So when these articles came, then I couldn't ignore it. And so I told him, I said, I think I'm going to talk to somebody. And I spoke to my brother, who's a doctor. He's a pediatric surgeon. And when he told me, I have been wanting to talk to you for a while because I don't think he's developing in the way he should be.
Okay.
That is when there was like literally a stone in my heart, because I felt like, okay, it's not just me thinking that way. Somebody else thinks that way, which makes it a reality.
Real.
And so we said, we will go and we will get a diagnosis of dyslexia, and it's not going to be a problem and whatever. And so I remember very clearly, 4th of January, 9 a.m., we had an appointment at Umeed Child Development Center to meet Dr. Vibha Krishnamurthy, who became Veer's developmental pediatrician and is now a friend, guide, mentor, everything to me. And within 5 minutes, she told us he's on the spectrum. And I said, that's not my son. What are you talking about? And she said, no, he's got autism. And I suggest you read 3 websites. Do not Google, which of course I did not listen to. And then she told me and my husband, she said, come back after a week and speak to me. So I said, okay, we went home. It was a blur. We had no clue what to do, what to think, how to behave, who to tell, how to tell. It was all a blur. And that weekend, all of us fell sick and had 104 degrees temperature. Like Veer, my daughter Gayatri, my husband and I, all of us were
together.
Sick. We all fell sick. And later on, when I thought about it, I realized that because of the stress, my immunity had dipped so low that I must have just, it must have been a stress fever. That our immune systems had just collapsed completely. And it had gone to the kids. And I'm sure, because I have always felt that with Veer especially, and he was the first one to get the fever, that connection, especially when he was younger, was very strong. I would get stressed, he would get fever. My anxiety would go up. His anxiety would go up.
So somewhere his brain is reading your signals much more strongly
very clearly.
Maybe Gayatri, maybe your daughter.
And so he got sick, Gayatri picked up on it, and then both of us fell sick. And that whole weekend, we had burning fever. And on Monday morning, literally by Saturday, Sunday, we had fever. Monday morning, the fever went.
Gone.
It was gone. And it was so bizarre, and then I remember we went back, we spoke to Vibha, and she explained it to us, and we understood, and we knew that the path ahead for us would be very difficult. But I remember her saying, she said, look, this is not a 100-meter race. It's a marathon. You need to pace yourself. You need to take breaks. You need to do that. But did I do that? No. I didn't. I went full swing into it. And so did I burn out? Yes.
Action mode.
Action mode. I burnt out.
Yeah.
And so every time I talk to parents, I say,
Mm.
please take time for yourself. Do not burn out. Look after yourself.
Mm.
Do not feel guilty spending time away from your child. It is okay to take breaks. And fortunately, there's a lot more awareness about mental health these days, because ultimately it is for a developmental pediatrician to diagnose the condition.
So this term developmental pediatrician, how many such specialists are there in our country?
Very few. And I was going to tell you this earlier, that pediatricians, regular pediatricians,
Right.
do not know that much about autism. I was told by our pediatrician that it is literally like a half a page in their pediatric book, pediatric textbooks on whatever neurodevelopmental disorders or whatever. They do not know
Oh.
about autism. Now there are people who are training to be developmental pediatricians. When Veer was diagnosed, there were hardly any in the country. I'm talking about 2008 is when his diagnosis happened.
Yeah.
There were hardly any. We were very lucky. We lived in Bombay. We were very lucky. We knew people.
Yes.
And we knew Vibha and could get an appointment. But otherwise, because there is a paucity of developmental pediatricians, appointments are given after 6 months, 8 months. You have to wait.
Goodness. Is there some treatment or therapy for autism?
Yes, there is definitely therapy. So typically,
You can't just give a pill and say, eat this for the rest of your life.
No. A lot of parents come and say, fix my child.
Right.
There is no fix. There is no fix. There is therapy.
Fix yourself first.
Yeah. The only fix that can happen is acceptance. But that is a journey that every parent has to undergo. There are parents who will just kind of get into it and say, okay, I accept this child for who they are. Interestingly, I have seen in my years of work as a therapist that the lower social economic class will have much more acceptance than a more upper middle class or upper
That
class.
is a revelation.
Because
that is very surprising.
They feel that this child has come to us from God. We
God's
have been
gift.
given this child to look after. And so there is this immediate acceptance, immediate embracing, and where the family lives in, like, say, a basti or a chol, where everybody knows that, this child is
Special.
different. And so they will come and they will, just accept who that child is. And that's really quite something.
Where does schooling fit in for these kids?
Schooling is the big gap that is there in this country. So under the Right to Education Act,
Yes.
every child has the right to an education until the age of 14. Now, when you put that into practice, it is very, very different. So schools will not, it becomes very difficult for a child who has autism
Schools don't want
to
them.
get into
Schools don't want them. They don't want the complication.
They do not want the complication. There was a very prestigious school in Bombay, which was very inclusive. And I remember telling Vibha, I said, should we reveal the diagnosis? And she said, yes, they are very inclusive. You reveal it. It's fine. So we went into the interview. We told them, they asked us, if you had a choice between your son getting admission and your daughter getting admission, what would you choose? I said, please give it to my son. And then we didn't get him. And I was heartbroken. I was absolutely heartbroken. And so then the next school that we went to for an interview, and they did not have, they said, a friend of mine told me they don't have child observation. They only have parents. You go and you wow them and do not say anything. And so we didn't say anything.
So you just kind of cheated your way into
our way in. I didn't
admission.
like it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you've got to do what you've got to do.
What you got to do. Yeah.
To get your child
I mean, they're
into
asking
school.
for it, right?
Yeah. And so we got him in and we didn't say anything. And within a week of school opening, we were told, can you please come and meet us?
Okay.
So we went and they said, they almost like, it was like a rap on the knuckles.
Yeah.
You didn't say anything to us. I said, yes, I know. And at that time, I was a very meek, mild mother. And I literally would go like with folded hands and say, yes, but please tell me, what can we do and stuff like that. And they said, yeah, we'll see what we can do and we'll try and do whatever. And so, of course, every time the phone would ring from the school, my heart would sink because I'd say, oh God, now what's going to happen? Are they going to ask me to leave
But they
school?
are not trying to manage the situation at their end.
So they didn't for 6 months.
Okay.
And then after 6 months, they said, we've got a special educator and she's going to start working with him. And 3 months after that, the teachers, we went for the parent-teacher meeting. And again, I went in with my heart sinking. And they said, oh, he's made such progress. And I wanted to say, obviously, he's going to make progress. Because if you get a special educator to work with him and explain things to him the way he needs to be explained, he's going to understand. He's not a dumb kid. You know, he will understand. So, of course, he's going to make progress. And so they said, okay, fine, we're going to continue getting the special educator to work with him. I said, okay, fine. We saw that the school was not doing anything to sensitize the other kids. And there was such a big gap socially between him and the other kids. And I didn't want him to be in a situation where all the other kids are invited to birthday parties and play dates and he's not.
Right.
And so we took a decision to move him to a special school.
Okay.
And so he went to 2 special schools and he completed his 10th grade.
And he was happier in the special schools?
He was much happier. And so then when we considered doing the 12th grade privately, I started it and I saw that he was getting anxious and I said, you know what, forget it. It is not worth it. It's a piece of paper. I don't need it. And so I just let it go.
And what did he do instead?
So he did 4 years at Skill Shakti community, where he learned a lot of skills. He's like knows Canva. He can do different things on the computer, Google Sheets, Google Slides, you know, all that kind of stuff. Those subtler skills, negotiation, how to write an email, how to write a message, what to say when, sort of. I mean, he doesn't know that completely, but somewhat. And it gave him a huge group of friends, which he has to this day. And alongside that, he also did internships. So he did an internship at Mag Street Kitchen. He did an internship at the Taj at Kolaba. He did an internship with the Lalit. And I also realized that he's interested in bakery. And so I enrolled him for 2 hobby bakery courses at Sophia College. And it was really fantastic. And he, you know, really did a good job there. And so he is going to start a bakery and patisserie course at Sophia's in the next month, where he's going to learn to be a bakery chef.
What does this do for him in terms of job prospects?
Jobs are, again, an area where there is quite a gap. So typically the jobs that were given to people who are autistic are candle making, painting on diyas, you know, making envelopes and gift bags and things. There's nothing wrong with that. I totally think that there is nothing wrong with that. But what used to happen is that anybody on the autism spectrum was shoved into that, whether they had the ability to do more or not. It was almost like if you're autistic, your potential is limited to making candles and painting diyas.
Gets slaughtered
very quickly. Now there are different, just like autism is a spectrum, there are different brains which can do different stuff. There are some kids who are great at software and at coding. There are some who are great at visual arts. There are some who will be very good even in terms of they're very chatty, ironically. There are people who are great actors because they know memory is it's a function which is extremely, extremely sharp amongst autistic individuals. So they can learn lines and they can emote on stage. They might not be able to negotiate life and the social situations and emotions off stage, but they can be great on stage.
Because that's put on a grid, no? That's put in a grid and they can see that grid.
So
that's beautiful.
They could do all sorts of things. But because you've been slotted into this candle making, diya painting bracket, a lot of them don't get to explore their potential. And in between, there was a lot of emphasis on let's start autism at work programs. You know, companies started this. But the fact of the matter is that if you hire anybody with a disability, you're going to have to do certain things. Right? What do companies do usually? They build a ramp, they build a disabled washroom, and that's it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm.
Then you hire somebody on a wheelchair.
Yeah.
It's great that you're hiring somebody on a wheelchair, but you can do more.
Mm.
When it comes to neurodiversity and to autism, there are things which people can put into place, which will not only make life and the environment and processes better for the autistic people, they will do it for everybody.
For everybody.
For example, when you have an employee who's in the workplace giving written instructions, okay, having a clear schedule, okay, worked from 9 to 11, 11 to 11:20, coffee break, 11:20 to 1:30, work on XYZ. After that, lunch, 1:30 to 2:30 lunch, 2:30 to 4, work on whatever. And then 4 to 4:15 coffee break, 4:15 to 6 o'clock work, 6 o'clock go home. Okay, if you have a schedule like that, it can help anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody would benefit. Everybody gets anxious when suddenly you're told, hey, you got to come into my office into a meeting.
Yeah.
Anybody, if you are to tell me that, I'll get anxious.
Yeah.
Everybody would benefit from having signage. Everybody would benefit from having an environment where there is natural light, where there is a fixed seating instead of walking in and saying, okay, where should I sit today? Having a fixed desk. Everybody would benefit from being able to plug in headphones and concentrate on work. These are the modifications that are.
And in fact, there are studies that if you hire people with special needs, you become a kinder, politer organization yourself.
You do.
Because the team comes together to support that person.
And you know what? There is that certain kind of affirmative bias which comes in. Okay? I will hire people who look like me, think like me, are like me.
Yeah.
Who have the same ideology as me. And so we will produce the same kind of product or give the same solution that has always been. Okay, now if you hire somebody who thinks differently, whose brain is wired differently, you might find a solution to a problem which you're struggling with, which might be very, very different, which your brain is not capable of thinking of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But do you want to do that? Because then what happens is you have to then hire somebody who's different, but who might have different support needs. You might need to support them differently.
Yeah.
Are you willing to make that effort? A lot of people aren't.
I'm enjoying talking to you because you have such a depth of insight into this situation. And obviously you have studied it inside out. You know what I'm also sensing is that parents would need a lot of therapy themselves. This is not easy.
It's not.
Especially moms. Because moms end up spending all the time with the children. The dads go off to work and they may say that we are dads of an autistic child, but then they have another world which they can dip into.
The moms need the therapy, yes, but the dads sometimes need it more.
Okay.
Because the father goes to work, but the father has to be the provider.
Yeah.
Therapy is not cheap. It is expensive. So sometimes fathers are under a lot of financial pressure because they have to now not only provide for the regular school fees, etc., they have to provide for therapy fees. Plus, a father crying, I don't think that's still, men crying is still not looked at.
No.
Very well in the Indian scenario.
So
you have
how
to be
do they
macho, you have
express
to be a man.
anxiety?
How do you express your anxiety? Plus, a woman sitting in a waiting room of a therapy center will talk to another woman and say, how old is your child? Oh, my child does OT here. Where does your child do OT? I've done this with my child. I take my child to here. I give my child this, do whatever. Two fathers sitting in a waiting room. Firstly, if they are sitting in a waiting room, not so much.
Yeah.
They're not going to talk. They're going to be sitting on their phones.
Yeah.
They're going to be reading the paper. They're not going to even look at each other.
Yeah.
Right? And so who do they talk to?
Yeah.
Do they talk to their friends who have neurotypical kids? Maybe not, because men usually may not discuss emotional issues.
Sure.
Very, very rarely.
Sure.
And so they carry that emotion, and it's not like they don't feel.
Yeah.
They do feel, but they carry it in themselves for years.
Yeah.
And sometimes, at some point of time, it explodes, and then it is really, really quite bad.
And I suppose a lot of marriages would be getting impacted by this
they would
setup.
Absolutely. So they would.
And is it my understanding that the sibling is the one who always takes a backseat when there is a special needs child in the family?
That is very often the case.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very often the sibling is the one who takes the back seat.
Mm.
And that can have very negative repercussions as they grow older.
I think so, yes.
Because that sibling is very often the one who has to eventually look after
Yeah.
the disabled sibling
Yeah.
when the parents
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And there is so much resentment,
Yeah.
and it just ends very badly for everybody.
Right.
I think for us, because we had twins,
Ah.
we were conscious of the fact that we had to spend time with them individually from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, there were times when, yes, of course, I mean, Veer's needs were prioritized,
Yes.
especially if there were sensory needs. And I remember this very, very clearly, this one day when Gayatri she was 6 years old or something like that. And he had a huge meltdown. She said, I hate him. Why was he born?
Mm.
And it was,
That tears your heart. That
was
just
one of
tears
those-
your heart. Yeah.
those days which I would not wish on my
Yeah.
enemy,
Yeah.
It was horrible.
And you feel so helpless.
You feel so helpless because what
Yeah.
can you do? You
What can
can't
you do?
shout at her because you
Yeah.
understand why she's feeling the way she is. But at the same time, this guy is not,
Yeah.
he can't help how he is
Yeah.
behaving,
Yeah.
And for us, what worked and what flipped the narrative was when she was about 8 years old, and we told her, what autism was, and we told her his brain is wired differently, and we told her that think of yourself not as the twin, think of yourself as the older sibling. And I could see this aha kind of moment happening on her face, because she said,
Suddenly she gets it.
I am the older sibling. I am the older sister. So that means I have to protect my brother. Then it just reached a point where they ended up becoming friends and they did stuff together. And now it's just so beautiful because she's been gone for 3 years, and I used to worry how he would react to her being in college. And I think he has flowered being the only child. I don't know what is going to happen when she comes back home. But he's really loves it. And they have developed this beautiful bond. She says, oh God, Mama, he just does the sweetest thing. I just love him so much. All her friends, they know they'll come home. Veer will say hi, and they'll say, hi, Veer. And he'll say hi. And he'll kind of go, but he will message all her friends on their birthdays. He's on Instagram with all of them, and they just know him and they love him and they're fine.
Yeah. So you've written a book called Beyond the Blue, and I have read it cover to cover in almost one sitting. It's a beautifully written book, very moving in parts. So what was the impetus for writing the book?
It was in 2020, and my agent who had worked with me on my first book, Spiritual Parenting, called me and said, somebody's interested in a book on autism. Can you put together a brief? And it was around the time that I was leaving my job at Umeed. I'd been there for 10 years and I was leaving. And she said, can you put together a brief? And so I did. And she sent it to the publishing house, and the publishing house said no, because it wasn't, they felt it wasn't a sellable topic. And so I said, okay. But I said, that doesn't stop me from writing.
Right.
And so I said, okay, I think I'm ready. Now's the time. And so I wrote the first chapter, which is, it starts with a chapter called The Diagnosis, which is a chapter which is about how Veer was diagnosed and the day he was diagnosed and what happened. And I wrote the chapter and so much came out. And I wrote it in one sitting. And it was one of those processes where I would look at something and say, I just wrote that? Like how? Where did it come from? It was just coming out from inside. And it was the most cathartic thing I have done in my life.
One more aspect that, aside from the book, of course, is this whole idea of buddy up. So tell me, do autistic children make friends easily? What happens to their social circle?
So there is the misconception that autistic individuals do not want to be with other people. I think I have learned that everybody needs human connection.
Mhm.
Whether you're autistic, whether you've got any other disability, or whether you're neurotypical, able-bodied, everybody needs some human connection. Then Vibha had told me that you must meet this boy called Mihan. He has Down syndrome. Get in touch with his mother, Monisha. And so I actively avoided Monisha. She would keep chasing me and saying, let's meet. And I would say, yeah, I'm busy at work. I've got this, I've got that. So it's a joke now with us that I actively avoided her. Finally, the two boys met.
Mhm.
While we were going home, I remember asking Veer, I said, did you enjoy your time with Mihan? He said, yes. I said, would you like to meet him again? He said, yes.
Wow.
One lunch led to 2, led to 3, led to 4, sleepovers, movies, etc.
So just
And
friendship.
And now Veer and Mihan are part of a group. They are out every weekend, out during the week, movies, concerts, parties.
What a blessing.
And I thought, wow, why can't other people get this? We both had this idea that other
Right.
people should have this option. But other people don't live in Bombay. They don't have access to Vibha. So what do they do? So we said, okay, let's do something about it. And so we explored website, Facebook page, app, what should we do? And so we said, let's build an app. And so we created this app. It's called Buddy Up Network. It is a social app for people with disabilities. And it helps mental health by easing the problem of loneliness and isolation. It solves for that.
Right.
It is for everyone, including people with disabilities. And so we give people the option of looking for love and life partner.
Nice.
But it is not like a swipe right, swipe left type of app.
Okay.
It is what we call a friendship first app. That is how the app kind of evolved. It's in English, it's in Hindi.
Yes.
It is free. It is on for Android and iPhones. And the thing is that it is accessible. So it's accessible to visually impaired users. It is got a talk back. It is, they can access the app. And now we are working currently with a group which will convert a lot of the text into sign.
This conversation has pumped me up a lot, Gopika. You have, emerged as somebody who's really risen to the occasion and actually imbibed so much more than
I feel
you
Veer
could
has
have.
been my biggest teacher. I have learned so much from him. Our whole family has.
Yeah.
But I think the amount that this child has taught me, I would be a very, very, very different person if he was not in my life.
Yeah.
Very different person.
All the best with
Thank you.
Buddy Up as
Thank
well. And of course, Veer. Veer was the center of this conversation.
Thank you.
All the best to him.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gopika. Hello and namaste. I hope you've been watching these conversations that I have brought to you with some very remarkable women in our country. The conversations, as you know, are about anything and everything that matters to a woman, and then, of course, by corollary, to society. If you are enjoying these conversations, do please like, share, subscribe, so that others in your circle can also enjoy them. Thank you. Keep watching.